Have you ever felt have you ever felt broken? As if everyone else around you seems to have figured it out. Or maybe I can ask, have you ever felt alone? Even when you're in a large group of people. It's a really strange feeling, isn't it? Like you're physically there, but emotionally, it's like you're somewhere else differently. I know that feeling really, really well. And hi, everybody who is joining in. Today, I want to talk about something we rarely say out loud, the S word, suicide. Drop a yes in the comments if you've been personally affected by suicide, whether it's been through a friend, a community member, a loved one, or even your own thoughts. No judgment. No judgment. Dropping a yes in the chat is just showing that this affects many of us. In fact, suicide rates have been on the rise for years. Did you know that 1.6 million Americans struggle with suicide attempts yearly? And up to 10% of patients, of people who are diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, 10% will die by suicide. Take a breath into that. Let's start with the truth that needs to be said. Talking about suicide does not increase the chances of suicide happening. In fact, not talking about it does way more damage. And that's why I'm here. Not to dance around it, but to talk about it because it deserves to be talked about. To break the stigma around suicide. In fact, I invite you to say it with me right now. Suicide. No judgment. Drop one word in the chat. How does saying that word make you feel? Scared? Nervous? Taboo? Not your fault. Those feelings, those thought patterns, those are societal expectations that are coming through you right now. You're breaking the mold of normal each time you say it. Suicide. With each time you talk about it, suicide. So thank you for saying it, for bringing the power back to the collective, to the community, and being a part of the revolution that is de-stigmatizing mental health. I'm standing here today live from my dream home in Fort Collins, in my dream little office with my plants. I'm happily married in a safe and loving marriage, and I'm living a life that I never thought was possible. I'm doing things like puppy yoga, cycling in blue wigs, and being completely weird and authentic in the best way possible. But a few years ago, I was in a very, very different place. You see, I used to fear talking about suicide. I feared the judgment, the shame, the possibility that I'd be abandoned or even locked away in a psych ward if I talked about my own ideations or feelings around it. No one around me really talked about it, unless it was to make fun of those who were struggling with it or the stigma around it. Honestly, every time people talked about it, it just felt so overwhelming. I felt trapped, not just in my situation, but in my own mind. Take a breath if you resonate with any of that. I struggled with self harm for most of my life. And no, it wasn't just the Hollywood stereotype of cutting. It showed up in my eating habits, in my relationships, in the way I completely neglected my own self care and abandoned parts of myself. Self harm was like this really weird thread that just kept finding its way into everything that I was doing. Whether I was starving myself or binging on food, whether I was finding myself in toxic relationship dynamics of abuse or anxious attachment, or just through a complete lack of boundaries. The worst part, I was going through all of this and I didn't even know how to talk about it. Have you ever felt like that? Like you were just going through the motions, maybe not fully connected to your own life or even to your own body. No judgment. As a child, I was emotionally aware. Some might call it sensitive, but I remember crying when my dad hit the table because I felt the table didn't like it. I would ask my classmates how they felt, and at recess, I was often found talking to plants or inanimate objects like the swing set because I was so attuned to the emotional atmosphere around me. But growing up in Sebring, Florida, that wasn't something people embraced. It wasn't normal. I was the sensitive one. I was the black sheep. Take a breath if any of that resonates. So it showed up in my life as learning how to swallow my words. First, I hid behind schoolwork, then sports. That's right, everybody. I played sports. What's up? And then I also found myself hiding from sports to relationships, then alcohol. I dismembered parts of myself that I thought was unlovable, that I thought was so overwhelming. I tore away the pieces of myself that didn't seem to fit in the world around me. And that left me feeling unsafe in my own mind, alone in a crowd, misunderstood at my core. It was then in my teenage years that suicidal ideation first entered my life. I was a teenager, overwhelmed by emotions that were too big for me to process, and in a world that didn't seem to have a place for my emotions. In a world where I wasn't given the tools to learn how to process, let alone talk about what I was feeling or experiencing. It felt like my emotions were these huge waves that were crashing over me, toppling me over, and no one could understand how heavy they were. Can you relate to that feeling? The feeling that you're somehow too much for the people around you, like you have to shrink or mask the parts of yourself that don't fit in. The truth is, those who struggle with suicide ideation, those who have attempted suicide, those people who die by suicide often experience immense emotional pain. They're not, I want to bust another myth right now. There's another myth, one, that we can't talk about suicide, and two, that those who are struggling with suicide are doing it because they're selfish or they're seeking attention. Plot twist, mother lovers, they're not. They're not being selfish. They're not seeking attention. The truth is they're overwhelmed and they don't have the tools to navigate the emotional pain that they're struggling. And I didn't have the tools either. I didn't know how to handle my emotions and I thought I had to face them alone. In 2014, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, commonly known as BPD, a label that only added to the stigma and to the heaviness and the waves of mental health that were crashing on me. But at the same time, it also gave me a little bit of an understanding. Finally, an explanation for the chaos that was in my mind. But even though getting that diagnosis and the support in 2014, it wasn't until 2016, after I hit rock bottom for several attempts and being in a relationship of toxicity, of abuse, of shame, of guilt, that I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was something else out there for me. It was the summer of 2016, and I was laying on a dirty theater floor covered in stale beer, shame, guilt, and popcorn. And the months leading to this, the years leading to this, I'd become a shell of the woman that I once knew, constantly struggling with dissociative patterns, numbing myself, and putting on a mask. You might not have known that I was going through those struggles because what it looked like to the outside world was me in wanderlust, traveling, going to Asia and all of the places around the world. And deep down, I was weaning. I was losing parts of myself. And on that dirty theater floor, summer of 2016, I was just so exhausted, so defeated, and so tired. And I just remember knowing and feeling like I should get off the floor, but I just didn't know how. I was so tired. And the theater door was open. And I was just looking at that door that had its chipped green, ugly paint. And a breeze came in. And for the first time in a really long time, I felt like I had a choice. And I heard a voice say, "Get up." And to say it was easy to get up is an understatement because healing isn't always sparkling butterflies and rainbows. And plot twist, it doesn't have to be as hard as society makes it out to be. But it was in that moment that I began to shift. It was in that moment that I began to connect to my own choice. And slowly, painfully, but surely, I realized that I wasn't broken, just a little bruised. And I wasn't alone. Today, I send love to the version of myself that went through all of that, and to everyone who might be feeling that right now. That version of me, she wasn't broken, and she did not deserve the shame, the judgment, or the isolation that she was experiencing. She had a heart that was too big, emotions that were too raw, and no one taught her how to harness them. No one gave her the tools, and that was not her fault. And if you're struggling, just know if you don't have the tools, it's also not your fault. If you're listening to this right now, I just want you to know you're not broken either. You're not too much. You're not crazy for feeling the way that you do. The war in your mind is real, but it doesn't mean you have to fight it alone. And again, it's not your fault you weren't given the right tools. It's your choice of whether you want to take action and find the tools that are right for you. The biggest part of healing and really being able to navigate my suicidal ideation was really being able to step out of the box, to say, fudge you, society and normal, and to really start taking my own healing, my own independence, my own sovereignty into my own hands. And it was hard, it was annoying, and I was afraid. I was worried about bringing all this stuff up. If I can't even talk about my feelings, how the fudge am I supposed to talk about my feelings to overcome them? Plot twist. There's no one size fits all. And if you've ever felt like you were drowning, like the waves of emotions were just too much for you to bear, I want you to just think of yourself as a ship out at sea. And you're just out there floating on the beautiful waves. Maybe you can even just take that moment and feel the ocean winds kind of brushing against your face, because healing isn't about banishing the storms altogether. Just like being out at that ship at sea, storms will come, but it's about finding your lighthouse, a light that guides you home to yourself, even when you can't see it clearly. And here's the thing. Sometimes when you found your way, you become the lighthouse for someone else. Even in your darkest moments, your journey has the power to light the way for others. And it has the power to light the way for yourself. This series that I'm starting here, this suicide support series, it's not just about my story. It's about opening up a space where you can feel safe in your own mind, where we can break down stigma together and create a world where mental health is met with compassion and understanding, where you are empowered and feel safe enough to go out into the world, break out of the box of normal, and say, I'm ready for a tool that works for me, because I am not broken, just a little bruised. And even if you're feeling like a hot mess, it's okay, because feeling messy doesn't mean you're a mess. If you've ever felt unsafe in your own mind, or if you know someone who's struggled, join me in this series. This is for you, because we're all in this together. What we're focusing on is suicide. And I know it has a connotation, but the more we can say it, the more we can talk about it, the easier it is to overcome. So everybody, I'm Des Caminos, embodiment and somatic practitioner. And thank you for joining me on this Sunday to come in, to be a part of the revolution that is destigmatizing mental health. And for those of you who are on my personal page, jump over to Des Caminos and follow me if you are interested in being a part of this series. Next week, I'm going to be coming in live to be talking about not broken, just bruised. And I'm going to be sharing some tangible and tactile tools on how to really start tending to those wounds that you might be feeling, those bruises, because I know you've been through some shiitake. It's rough out there in the world, but you've got this. You're not alone. I promise. Bye, everybody.